Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, August 3rd, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. President Biden wants Taiwan aid in the next Ukraine funding bill. So Financial Times reported on Wednesday that the White House is expected to ask Congress to include military aid for Taiwan in the next spending bill to fund the war in Ukraine. They want to lump it together. Citing people familiar with the matter, the report said that the White House's Office of Management and Budget is expected to submit a request to Congress for another emergency supplemental funding bill sometime this month. And this is a type of spending that is not capped by the debt ceiling deal that was reached between the White House and House Republicans. So the White House will ask to include funds for Taiwan through the Foreign Military Financing, which is a State Department program that gives foreign governments money to purchase U.S. weapons. So there's $2 billion in this FMF for Taiwan included in the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act, but those funds were not granted by congressional appropriators. So the White House is looking to get some. And this news comes after the White House announced that it was sending Taiwan a $345 million military aid package using the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which allows the U.S. to send weapons directly from Pentagon stockpiles, the primary way they've been arming Taiwan. The 2023 NDAA also included $1 billion in this authority for Taiwan. And this marked the first time that the Biden administration drew from those funds. So both of these types of assistance are unprecedented in the era of normalized relations between the U.S. and China, as I've covered quite a bit. Since 1979, the U.S. has always sold weapons to Taiwan, but never financed the purchases or provided them free of charge. So from Beijing's perspective, this new form of U.S. support is extremely provocative, and we've seen several statements from Chinese government officials condemning the move. So according to Financial Times, including the Taiwan aid with the Ukraine spending bill could help win over support from Republicans who have opposed supporting the proxy war against Russia. Many Republicans who are against arming Ukraine say that the U.S. should be focused on arming Taiwan instead. So I don't know, this is Financial Times' take on it, and they quote a guy named Zach Cooper from the American Enterprise Institute. He said, quote, adding supplemental funding for Taiwan will put some House Republicans in a more difficult position since many who oppose Ukraine funding remain in favor of supporting Taiwan, end quote. And the Republican that, unfortunately, that is the situation with a lot of Republicans that oppose intervention in Ukraine. They want the U.S. to, they have their preferred intervention over in Taiwan. Kind of the embodiment of that is Josh Hawley. He sent a letter to the Biden administration towards the end of last year saying that all these weapons you're sending to Ukraine, you should be sending them to Taiwan instead. He was also the only person in the Senate to vote against Sweden and Finland joining NATO. And in an op-ed explaining his decision, he said, he's against it because he thinks the U.S. should be building up alliances in Asia, which they are, but I guess not enough for him. So we'll see. I mean, it's not clear right now how much the White House will request for Ukraine and Taiwan for this emergency supplemental funding that they're going to be looking for. So far, Congress has authorized $113 billion in spending on the war in Ukraine, which includes military aid, economic assistance, money to replenish U.S. stockpiles, and funding for U.S. troop deployments in Eastern Europe. So it's just really something here. The symbolism is pretty huge here. The fact that they're going to treat arming Taiwan the same as arming Ukraine. It's an emergency. We must ship them these weapons, get weapons to Taiwan as fast as we can. It's just we're going to find ourselves in another proxy war, except with China and Taiwan, the U.S. is planning to intervene directly. At least that's what Biden said, and that U.S. military leaders are saying that they're planning for a war with China. So that's the situation. It's very concerning. And again, sometime this month, we're going to see the White House make this request. And this is just based on this Financial Times report, so maybe there's a chance that they might choose not to do it. But there's been other signs that they've been looking to include military aid in these bills. So military aid for Taiwan in these Ukraine bills. All right, the next one here, no Ukrainian breakthroughs in counteroffensive. So Ukrainian forces have still made no breakthroughs against Russian forces in the counteroffensive, despite sending thousands of more troops to the front for a renewed push in the southeast. This is according to a report from Politico. They cited Pentagon officials. So U.S. officials said last week that the main thrust of the Ukrainian counteroffensive had begun, and that Ukraine committed NATO-trained forces it was holding in reserve. The push was focused on Zaporozhye, and the idea was to sever the land bridge Russia has secured to Crimea, and there have been attacks in other areas along the front, more in the east as well. The Politico report said that Ukraine committed 150,000 troops to the assault along 3 axes of attack, but Pentagon officials said that the operations have not yielded significant results, with one saying that Ukrainian gains are being measured by the hundreds of meters. One official said, quote, "They are making mostly small incremental gains. They are still facing stiff Russian resistance, second and third layers of defenses," end quote. The report said that Ukraine is still keeping some of its forces in reserve. So as I've mentioned quite a bit, the Wall Street Journal reported recently that Western officials did not believe Ukraine had enough weapons, basically didn't think Ukraine was really prepared to push back the Russians, but just hoped that they would anyway. And there's been signs that the U.S. thought the same thing as well, but they pushed for this counteroffensive anyway. And this next story here is about, some of the cost. So 20 to 50,000 Ukrainians have lost limbs since Russia invaded. And this is a report based on a report from the Wall Street Journal. And this is a huge number. Between 20,000 and 50,000 Ukrainians have lost one or more limbs since Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. This figure is based on estimates made by prosthetics firms, doctors, and charities. The number could be higher as it takes time to register amputees after they undergo surgery, and fighting has intensified since Ukraine launched its counteroffensive in June. So the higher end estimate of 50,000 came from the German prosthetics manufacturer Ottobock, which cited data from the government and medical partners. The estimate of 20,000 was based on data from the Kiev-based charity Health of the Ukrainian People, and the charity estimates the number of serious injuries in the war is at 200,000 and says about 10% of serious injuries typically require amputations. The number of Ukrainian amputations puts the war on the scale of World War I. Some 67,000 Germans and 41,000 Britons had to have amputations during the 4-year war. And when it comes to recent American wars, less than 2,000 Americans who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan in this century have had amputations. Ukraine has kept its casualty rates a secret throughout the war for propaganda purposes, but the staggering number of Ukrainians who lost limbs gives an idea of the human cost of the war. Citing Ukrainian military estimates shared with American surgeons, the Wall Street Journal report said that out of 100 soldiers wounded within about 3 miles of the front line, 36% suffered very severe injuries, while between 5% and 10% of all deployed troops were killed. So that's an idea of the casualties. Again, this is just a huge number of Ukrainians that have lost limbs. And, this human cost just doesn't seem to matter to the Biden administration, to most NATO countries. They just, think that they're weakening Russia, and that's what this is all about. It doesn't matter how many young Ukrainians are being sent to die or be maimed in this Brutal war. And if you go check out that Wall Street Journal report, they talk to individual people who have lost limbs and kind of more details about that. All right, so the next one here, Lula says that neither Putin nor Zelensky are ready for peace in Ukraine. So Brazil's President Lula said Wednesday that his country was trying to work toward peace in Ukraine, but that neither side is ready to end the fighting. He said, quote, neither Putin nor Zelensky are ready. Brazil's role is to try to arrive at a peace proposal together with others for when both countries want it. Lula criticized the UN Security Council for failing to stop the war and for failing to prevent U.S. and other Western invasions. That's right, folks. The U.S. has invaded a lot of countries this century. Lula said, quote, the UN Security Council has not worked. United States invaded Iraq. France and England invaded Libya. Now Russia. And everyone has veto power, end quote. And of course, the U.S. was very involved in the disastrous Libya intervention. Brazil has been working with other neutral countries to push for peace. Many African nations and China have offered frameworks for a peace deal, but there's no sign that negotiations will happen soon. Ukraine wants a full Russian withdrawal before talks can even happen. That's, of course, a non-starter for negotiations with Moscow. And then for their part, the Russians say that they're open to talks, but they insist that any future deal must recognize the territory it annexed in Ukraine as Russian, which is a non-starter for the Ukrainian side. And peace talks that were held in the early days of Russia's invasion did have a chance, but they were discouraged by the U.S. and its allies. Turkey said at the time that some NATO countries wanted to continue the war to weaken Russia, and that's something that Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin openly acknowledged was an American goal in Ukraine, and that was back in April 2022. Since then, a lot of people have died, and Russia has solidified its control of this territory. Brazil was invited to talks this week in Saudi Arabia, where Ukraine and the U.S. plan to pressure non-aligned countries to adopt Ukrainian demands for peace. Zelensky said on Wednesday that almost 40 nations will attend the August 5th and 6th meetings in Jeddah. Mexico's president has said that his country would only attend the talks if Russia was invited. So Zelensky says almost 40 nations are attending. It's still not clear, if China, India, Brazil, kind of the bigger nations are going to be attending these talks. All right, the next one here. Russia strikes Ukrainian port city near Romania. So Russian strikes were reported in the Ukrainian port city of Izmail, which is on a section of the Danube River that acts as a border between Ukraine and NATO member Romania. So if you're watching here, I just put in a screenshot from Google Maps to give you an idea of where this is. And this is the city Izmail. This is the commercial port. And just across the river, which I measured on Google Maps is about 1,000 feet, is Romanian territory. It's mostly rural-looking farmland, but there is a row of houses right on the river there. So Russia was bombing the city right there, right next to NATO territory, which is definitely concerning. And Ukrainian officials said that the city was attacked with drones. They said fires broke out at port and industrial facilities, and a grain elevator was damaged. Russia's RIA news agency cited sources who reported similar damage and added that a facility housing foreign mercenaries was also hit. So Russian strikes so close to Romania run the risk of Russian drones or Ukrainian air defense missiles landing in NATO territory. If you remember, back in November 2022, that was when a Ukrainian missile landed in Poland, even though Ukraine must have known that it was one of their missiles. Ukrainian officials, Zelensky and all of his top aides, claimed that it was Russian, and that was an effort to get, NATO to intervene directly against Russia. Luckily, Biden and Poland came out and said, no, this was, likely Ukrainian missile. 2 people were killed in that, but something like that happens again. You just never know how quick things could spiral. And Russia has been targeting Ukraine's ports on the Danube River and elsewhere since withdrawing from the Black Sea grain deal. Russian officials have said that the uptick in strikes in the region was a response to the latest bombing of the Crimean Bridge. The grain deal facilitated the export of grain out of Ukrainian ports. but Russia chose not to extend the agreement because it was not satisfied with UN and Western efforts to make it easier to ship Russian agricultural goods, which was another aspect of the deal. Moscow said that it would restore the grain deal if its conditions were met. One of Russia's main demands is reconnecting the Russian Agricultural Bank to the SWIFT payment system, which is a U.S.-led financial messaging system to process transactions. Yeah, so, and I know that they were launching strikes in other port cities on this river, but this one, I mean, just so close to Romanian territory. There's a lot of U.S. troops in Romania right now. All right. The next one here, this is from Kyle over at the Libertarian Institute. Poland opens HIMARS Academy, establishes brigades near Belarus. So Poland announced the formation of a new artillery brigade as well as a new training center for the high mobility artillery rocket system, the HIMARS. They will be positioned near the country's border with Belarus as tensions between Poland and Belarus continue to rise. So Poland's defense minister said that his military would create the first rocket brigade, which will be stationed within 100 miles from the border with Belarus. The backbone of the unit will be the HIMARS, which, of course, that's a system that the U.S. has been providing Ukraine. And Ukraine has been using it quite a bit in this war. Poland ordered 20 of the artillery systems from the U.S. and has already received 5 HIMARS. Warsaw also plans to develop a school for training soldiers on using HIMARS. According to the U.S. Army, the Abrams Academy provides Polish soldiers with specialized training. So this is going to be, the Polish defense minister compared it to the Abrams Academy, which is the training school for the U.S. tanks. And I'm sure that, they're going to involve Ukrainians with all this. So, yeah, more buildup in Eastern Europe. Again, and Poland has been very hawkish and very gung-ho. And this situation with Belarus just doesn't seem to be cooling down anytime soon. All right, the next one here. The West African Bloc says that intervention in Niger is the last resort. So an official representing a bloc of West African nations said Wednesday that military intervention in Niger to reinstate President Mohamed Bazoum is the last resort, but warned that the coalition is preparing for it. So the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, issued a statement on Sunday threatening to use force if Bazoum is not reinstated within a week, and this threat was backed by Secretary of State Antony Blinken. So the ECOWAS commissioner, I'm not sure if people use that shorthand, ECOWAS, but it seems right to me. So this is the ECOWAS commissioner. He said, quote, "The military option is the very last option on the table, the last resort, but we have to prepare for the eventuality," end quote. He also said that an ECOWAS team is in Niger to negotiate. So ECOWAS is a 15-nation bloc, but after a series of coups in West Africa, it has suspended several members, including Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, and now Niger. And Mali and Burkina Faso have warned that if this bloc intervenes in Niger, it would be a declaration of war against them. So that signals this could become a major regional war if this intervention goes ahead. And again, they gave the military junta a week to put Bazoum back in power, and there's no sign that they're going to be doing that. So, who knows how this is going to play out. And any intervention in Niger would likely involve the U.S. military. There's about 1,100 U.S. troops in the country and a major drone base that costs $110 million to build, known as Air Base 201. The U.S. is not going to want to give that up. And according to Task and Purpose, the U.S. cannot currently use Air Base 201 because Niger's airspace has been closed since the coup. On Tuesday, the Pentagon said that it had suspended security cooperation with Niger's military, but the U.S. still has not labeled the situation a coup, as that would require the suspension of aid. Pentagon spokesman Brigadier General Pat Ryder said, quote, "As far as security cooperation, those efforts right now are suspended in light of the situation, but certainly we maintain close contact with our Niger military counterparts in the country as the situation continues to unfold, end quote. So Ryder also said that there are currently no plans to pull U.S. forces out of Niger. And on Wednesday, the State Department ordered a partial evacuation of embassy personnel from Niger. So definitely something to keep an eye on. There's also French troops in the country. So this, again, if this does turn into an intervention to throw out this coup government, things could get really, really messy in West Africa. You know, there's a lot of anti-Western sentiment. Of course, there's accusations that Russia, is involved in this. There's no indication that Russia was behind the coup, but the post-coup government is going to be more friendly to Russia, like the ones in Mali, Burkina Faso. And this is, Africa has turned into kind of this Cold War influence battleground between the U.S., China, and Russia. And again, the U.S. doesn't want to give up that drone base. They fly a lot of operations out of there. So they're not just going to say, all right, you don't want us here, we'll get out. All right, the next one here, medical journals call for the abolition of nuclear weapons. This article is from Responsible Statecraft by Connor Eccles. So in an unprecedented move, more than 100 leading medical journals from around the world called for the abolition of all nuclear weapons in an op-ed published on Tuesday. So these journals said, quote, "The prevention of any use of nuclear weapons is an urgent public health priority, and fundamental steps must also be taken to address the root cause of the problem by abolishing nuclear weapons," end quote. They said that current non-proliferation efforts are inadequate to protect the world's population against the threat of nuclear war. I think that's certainly true. There is barely any arms control treaties left, just the New START. They added, quote, "As editors of health and medical journals worldwide, we call on health professionals to alert the public and our leaders to this major danger to public health and the essential life support systems of the planet and urge action to prevent it," end quote. So the co-authors included the editors-in-chief of The Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine, so two major medical journals there. And this article is set to release on the 78th anniversary of the American nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Hiroshima Day is August 6th, which is this Sunday. Those strikes killed as many as 200,000 Japanese civilians. And there's more attention on that with the Oppenheimer movie. Again, I haven't seen it, so I can't really comment on it too much. I got to go see it. It's just 3 hours is a pretty big chunk of my day. But I should watch it. But that is it for the news for today. I left up the one from yesterday about the military.com op-ed calling for a military draft because that is definitely concerning. Go check out our Viewpoints, one from Micah Meadowcroft. Another effort to restore congressional war powers has failed. That's over at the American Conservative. One from Lori Calhoun over at the Libertarian Institute. Implausible Deniability, America's Approach to Ukraine. Definitely go check that out. One from Brett Hines, How Lockheed's $7.9 billion stock buyback bonanza is paid for by you. That's from Responsible Statecraft. One from Kevin Gostola, 10 years after the U.S. military verdict against Chelsea Manning. That's at his website, The Dissenter, which is a great place to keep up on whistleblower news and the Assange case. The Spotlight is from Ted Galen Carpenter over at 1945. The Korea Armistice, a flawed model for ending the war in Ukraine. All right. That is it for me for today. You could always support us at antiwar.com/donate. Like and subscribe on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble. Leave a review if you listen on the Apple Podcast app. Share the show with your friends. Follow us on Twitter. I'm at DeCampDave. Antiwar.com is at antiwarcom. Also sign up for our newsletter. That way you get all the stories and the show in your mailbox every day. You can go to antiwar.com/newsletter for that. But I'll be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.